This crazy story went from 0 to 100 in a split second. It all started when this boy discovered a sinkhole in his back garden. It looked strange, and therefore, it instantly captured his curiosity. But this hole had significant consequences because when he told his parents about it, they were both arrested 1 day later. Boy discovers hole in garden, 1 day later, both his parents are arrested. As I mentioned, it all started when the 9-year-old Tom played out in his parents' back garden. Tom sat down in the grass and dug in the bright green pasture. He was looking for worms, but he found something completely different. As his hand touched the ground, he felt the earth trembling. Tom stood up from his seated position and looked on in awe as he saw the ground in front of his feet cave in. The sight of the sinkhole expanding frightened and confused Tom a bit, so he took a step back for his own safety. But that initial fear didn't last all that long. Because fright turned into intrigue quickly, Tom edged closer to the hole and decided to crouch down beside it. The rumbling stopped, so Tom estimated that it was safe now to take a look inside. He leaned over, bringing his head deep into the hole. "There is something in here." Everything in Tom's body wanted to get even closer so he could inspect the buried thing. But he changed plans when he heard his mom chanting his name inside the house. "Mom has to see this." He spoke with excitement. He ran inside, told her about the sinkhole, and pulled her sleeve until she was in the garden. When Tom showed the mysterious hole, his mother was hesitant. She didn't want to peek inside, but Tom was convincing enough to make her crouch beside him. With a worried look on her face, she put her head down the sinkhole and investigated. But pretty quickly, she let out a small scream. Tom's mom lifted her head from the hole and quickly got on her feet. She wanted to get away from this place and ordered her son to do the same. Together, they ran back inside the house. And once there, Tom's mom instantly picked up the phone to call the police. "Come over now." While Tom's mom was calling, he was in the other room. She closed the glass door behind her so Tom wouldn't interrupt her, but Tom could clearly see that his mother was talking frantically. She used many large arm movements and yelled a couple of times. Why the panic? Tom thought. Apparently, the urgency in his mother's voice resonated with the police because, within 15 minutes, Tom saw multiple police cars arrive at their house. They talked with his mother for a brief few minutes and got to work after that. The uniformed men taped down the entire garden area. But then the exciting part started. After securing the place, the police officers surrounded the hole Tom had discovered. They inspected the site, and after that, they started pulling something out of the sinkhole. The object seemed to be very heavy because it took 4 officers to lift it to the surface. But what was it? Tom sat behind the window in their living room, but by squinting his eyes, he still tried to see what the policemen found. The officers crowded the object at first, and when they scattered, they had already covered the item with a large tarp. What a mystery, Tom said while scratching his head. Tom speculated what could be underneath that large plastic sheet. A fossil? A pirate treasure? So many thoughts ran through his head, but none would turn out to be correct. After the police officers removed the object from their garden, calmness returned to their home, but unfortunately, it was short-lived. Because the same evening, their house was filled with noise. It was the sound of Tom's parents arguing with each other. Tom's parents had heated discussions before, but he never heard them like this. The young boy listened in and heard his mother mentioning the hole, but he couldn't make out much more. The arguing eventually died down, but the same could not be said about the heated tension surrounding that mysterious object. Because the very next morning, it reached its peak when the same policemen from the day before rang their doorbell. What do they want? Tom asked his mother with a worried face. Tom saw the uniformed men walk into their house with stern looks on their faces. They were very intimidating, but what freaked the young boy out the most was that the officers pulled out their handcuffs and arrested both of his parents. What is going on? Are Mom and Dad criminals? Tom had so many questions. While one of the police officers escorted Tom's parents to the police car, the other one approached Tom. "Hello, kid, I'm Officer Dunleavy. What's your name?" he asked. Tom said his name while weeping and asked what the policemen were doing. The officer couldn't say, but he asked Tom if there was anywhere he could stay for now. Tom shrugged his shoulders as he didn't know where to go. Fortunately for him, the neighbors heard and saw the commotion surrounding Tom's house and came outside. They talked to Officer Dunleavy in a quiet tone, and after they were finished, Tom was allowed to stay with them for now. As Tom locked hands with the next-door neighbor, his confusion rose. So much stuff happened that it was too much for his young mind to comprehend. And that same night, the TV added to that mindset. It was a little after dinner when the neighbors switched on the television. There, Tom suddenly saw his parents on the news. The news report mentioned a theft of epic proportions, and the faces of Tom's parents popped up beside it. It was unclear to Tom what they stole or why they were involved because the reporter didn't mention it. Every piece of the puzzle added more confusion, which frustrated Tom immensely. A frustrated Tom asked his neighbors what was happening because he started worrying about his parents. But they didn't know much more either. They only knew that it wasn't a good idea to expose Tom much longer to this dire news. So, as an act of kindness, they told him to go to bed early. But that night, everything changed, and the unclear became clear instantly. It all started when Tom couldn't fall asleep, which wasn't surprising with everything he went through. But because of this, he was awake to hear some noise from outside his bedroom window. The sound came from his parents' garden. Tom stood up from his borrowed bed and peeked carefully through the blinds. And that's when he saw 3 darkly clothed individuals. They were sneaking around his parents' garden, a place that Officer Dunleavy called absolutely forbidden that afternoon. Something isn't right, Tom whispered to himself. He had to do something. Tom didn't trust this situation one bit. His neighbors were far asleep, and even if they were awake, they would probably prevent Tom from doing something. So, while standing on just his toes, he quietly descended the stairs until he finally came to a halt at the adjoining fence. That's when he closed his eyes and listened. Tom tried to remain as quiet as possible while focusing on what was happening. He could hear the intruders digging up dirt in the pasture. But they also talked amongst each other, saying that the things they stole must be around here somewhere. What did they steal? At that point, Tom still didn't know. And that's when Tom heard for the first time what all the fuzz was about. The news reporter was vague about it, the officers wouldn't say, but these masked men spoke in simple terms. All of this commotion was about an old Egyptian statue. And the artifact was supposedly worth millions. But the masked intruders weren't done yet. They started laughing quietly but ominously. One of the men said that he saw the news report. The article blamed the theft on the lot's owners. With these folks taking the fall, we have free play to do as we please. And the statue wasn't the only thing they stole. The thieves just unknowingly confessed to their crimes. They stole a whole bunch of stuff and buried all of it in the garden of Tom's parents. And what was even worse was that his parents now took the fall for their crimes. Tom heard it from their own mouths, but there was one big issue here. It was the middle of the night with no other witnesses around. Tom was the only one who could verify that these crooks scammed his parents and committed the actual crime. Nobody was going to believe a 9-year-old boy who might do or say anything to free his parents. No, Tom needed proof. But to get that proof, Tom needed to act quickly. If he waited until morning without doing anything, the criminals would surely have dug up all their stolen items. They would be long gone by then, maybe even halfway to Mexico. The young crime fighter needed to stall their digging operation. He needed a distraction. Tom looked around frantically, and to his surprise, he quickly found the perfect distraction. It was the woman from across the street and her dog Larry. They were taking their midnight stroll like they did every day. Tom always found them irritating because Larry chased after anything that moved and barked while doing so. But that irritation was now a blessing in disguise because Larry's eagerness to run after things was just what Tom needed right now. The young boy pushed himself away from the wooden fence and ran into the streets, hoping that Larry would spot his movement. And luckily for Tom, he did. Tom waved his arms around wildly but did not make any sound. He wanted to surprise the thieves by introducing Larry into the backyard. They would get scared if they heard the voice of a young child, but getting caught off guard by Larry would surely freak them out. And Tom's plan worked to perfection. Larry, the 120-pound Rottweiler, started pulling on his leash as soon as he saw Tom. His owner always walked Larry at odd times to avoid distractions as much as possible. But this time, it was a necessary evil. Tom waved, and Larry pulled until his owner finally couldn't hold on anymore. The line slipped, and Larry bolted across the street. Tom and Larry were good friends, so he knew the intimidating dog wouldn't hurt him. But the same could not be said for the intruders in the garden behind him. Tom opened the garden fence door just enough so Larry could squeeze through. And then he waited. Loud barking and growling were heard behind the fence, and that was precisely what Tom hoped for. The neighbor from across the street arrived at Tom's location at that point, and she wanted to retrieve Larry from behind the fence, but Tom pleaded for her to wait, because moments later, the three criminals came climbing over the fence. Their clothes were torn to shreds, and they had shallow scratch marks all over their legs. Larry's owner was in shock. "Where are these people trespassing on your property?" the woman asked. Tom nodded as he started to explain the situation. They walked into Tom's parents' backyard and leashed the barking Larry again. And when Tom explained what these people did and how they framed his parents, the woman's mouth fell to the floor. "You're a very smart kid, using Larry like that," the woman said. But their work was far from done. The thieves could not get away with their stolen items, that much was clear. Because inside the garden was a large duffel bag with some of the stolen goods still in it. Larry scared them of good. "They fled without being able to take anything," Tom said, laughing. "But how are we going to catch them now?" That was where Larry's owner came into play. While Tom was busy keeping Larry inside the fenced garden, Larry's owner got a good look at the perpetrators. She said that one of the thieves had ripped the bottom part of his trousers. "And I saw a very distinctive tattoo there. Maybe that could lead us to them. But first things first. We need to exonerate your parents," the woman stated. She got out her phone and asked the police to come over immediately. Tom was glad that he wasn't alone in this anymore. Together, they could prove his parents' innocence. They didn't have to wait long for the police to arrive. And when they did, both Tom and Carol, who was Larry's owner, conveyed the same story. The fact that their separate stories matched up perfectly was critical in exonerating Tom's parents. Luckily for them, it did, and they were brought to the police station. While Tom and Carol shared details of the story again at the station, the other officers remained in the garden, where they would eventually dig up over 24 other valuable artifacts. Now, the items could finally be returned to the museum where they belonged. But there were still two things missing. Tom's parents needed to be freed, and the criminals still had to be caught. Luckily, their stories made sure that the exonerating process went smoothly. So, after all the facts were checked, both of Tom's parents were released from custody. Tom saw his parents enter the interrogation room, and an emotional reunion followed. Tom ran to his mom and dad, and the three hugged intensely. They heard what Tom did for them, and they couldn't be more proud of their clever son. And the second part of the problem was also not hard to fix. Carol sat down with a sketch artist and made a perfect reconstruction of the tattoo. The tattoo was cross-referenced with the police database, and within an hour, they found a perfect match. These criminals weren't first-time offenders, so a detailed description of them popped up on the screen. "We got our lead, let's go out and catch these bastards," one of the officers said confidently. Police set out on a massive manhunt to catch the criminals. But Tom didn't care for that part anymore. He was just happy to have his parents back. They were able to return home and resume their calm and safe life. The young boy was able to sleep in his own bed again. And the very next morning, the following day, Tom was met with a welcome surprise. His father woke Tom up and asked him to come down to the living room. The TV was on, and the same news broadcast that victimized his parents before was now giving them great news. They found the criminals who framed Tom's parents. Police were able to find the tattoo artist, which gave them a location. And instead of fleeing the country, they found all three of the perps at the given address. "What idiots," Tom said, smirking. The manhunt and a criminal investigation were over. And with that, the stress surrounding it. But there was still one more surprise. The phone rang almost immediately after the broadcast ended. It was the police station who asked Tom and his parents to come over. They obliged and were greeted with loud applause when they entered the station. The entire force honored the bravery of the 9-year-old Tom. Carol was there too. They both received a Medal of Honor from the police chief, and a news article was written about their actions. Tom was a nationwide hero. And the criminals got what they deserved, a 20-year prison sentence. Tom was an honorable kind, his parents were innocent, and now the whole country knew it too.